Welcome to my presentation on Tourette syndrome. Chosen to do a slideshow presentation with a voiceover. This is the first time I've done this, and I wasn't sure how things would go, but my 6-year-old saw me with this cool YouTuber headset and thought I was pretty cool. So I'm going to try this out and see how things go. So as I said, I'm going to do a presentation on Tourette syndrome. My first stop in researching Tourette syndrome was the Mayo Clinic website. That's my go-to place whenever I'm wanting to self-diagnose myself with any kind of condition. Their brief overview of Tourette is that it's a syndrome, a disorder that involves repetitive movements or unwanted sounds, tics, that can't easily be controlled. Tourette itself is about tics, so physical tics or verbal tics. As you'll see throughout the presentation, there are a lot of other underlying issues that are also associated with the syndrome. But Tourette itself is about the tics that people involuntarily have. Some of the associated issues you can see in this chart. There can be quite a few of them. So every individual that has Tourette may also have one or many of the following symptoms in this visual. Predominantly, the ones that are most associated with Tourette are ADHD and OCD. So it makes it a little challenging if you're a teacher in a classroom because students are not going to only have the tics, but you may be making accommodations or modifications for a variety of other issues as well. I grabbed 3 online resources. There are quite a few. A National Institute of Neurological Disorders and Strokes, that's from the States, and I was able to get a lot of information, a lot of medical information about Tourette from them. The Mayo Clinic, I find that a little bit easier. It's not in doctor language all the time. But my favorite is the one on the bottom, Tourette Canada. So that is a national organization, and they do support families and people with Tourette, and it's an easy to understand language, and it gives an overview and really all of the overview information that you may need for Tourette, and also how to find resources and supports for that. So here's the background information. Tourette syndrome is a neurodevelopmental or brain-based condition that causes people who have it to make involuntary sounds and movements called tics. The causes are genetic, and they're still trying to determine whether or not there are other factors that may contribute to people getting Tourette. They say that a lot of the symptoms of Tourette start to manifest themselves around the age of 6. It can also be younger, and some people can grow out of some of the tics by the time they're adults, but it's not something that goes away. It's a chronic disease. About 1 to 3% of the population have Tourette syndrome. A while ago, a long time ago, they thought it was a rare type of syndrome, but more and more people are actually being diagnosed. And it is more prevalent in boys than in girls. Medical information, I've already covered that, but what I really want to focus on in this presentation are the associated disorders, which I mentioned in the other slide. So ADHD, OCD, those are other things that also can be present with someone with Tourette. Support for parents. I live in Ottawa, and so when I took a look, actually that's in another slide, but medical professionals, counseling services, virtual communities, and community groups, and those were all suggestions on the Tourette Canada website. Educational information. I assume that this category was for teachers. Again, the Tourette syndrome itself is physical or verbal tics, but what you would want to be looking for as an educator would be additional issues that may cause learning delays or behavioral problems as well. And the behavioral characteristics are again the involuntary tics, both physical and verbal, and they can range from mild to severe. Role of community agencies, supporting the family and school professionals. So this would be the slide where I talk about Tourette Canada, the Ottawa chapter. They do hold monthly meetings for family and people affected by Tourette. And then we also have CHEO, the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario, which have some online resources. And then they also had a link to Tourette Canada as a resource. But those would probably be the two main go-to places when seeking information or support for families or the school. So strategies for successfully educating the child in an inclusive classroom. I've broken this down into two slides based on a lot of the assignments that we've had to do so far. So what I've decided to do in order to create a dialogue for those people participating in my seminar, I'm adding a Google slide with these categories in it that I'm going to share. I'm going to upload those and I'm going to share them with this presentation for everyone to sort of fill out. I found it kind of tricky actually because if you're only making accommodations for people with Tourette, then you're focusing on the verbal or the physical tics, which can vary from person to person. But then if you start taking into consideration all of the other issues that might happen, then you might look at the environment, instructional, and the assessment a little bit differently. So not only someone with tics, but someone with tics and OCD, or someone with tics and ADHD. And there's also a lot of social emotional issues involved with people with Tourette as well. So it'll be interesting to see how people respond to this assignment. The other ones that we talk about are social skills, literacy and numeracy, technology, and workplace preparation. My suggestion would be to take a look at other exceptionalities as well, and use some of those to guide you in filling out the chart. So I threw this in. I thought this was a great visual, and what I keep referring to during this presentation. Tourette syndrome, tics are just the tip of the iceberg. And as a teacher, I'm going to take that off my screen. As a teacher, I'm heavily invested in the social emotional needs of my students, whether it's because I'm teaching kindergarten at the moment, but even when I was teaching core French to 6, 7, and 8s. I find my students' well-being and their social emotional needs need to come first. And if you can take a look, bullying can be a big issue. These students can a lot of times appear different because of the physical tics, or if they're blurting things out in class when other students are not supposed to. It can cause a great deal of anxiety in students as well. Up here, it's called, there's rage, behavioral issues. My teacher instinct would say that I would address those social and emotional needs of the student before the academics, and that's sort of in one of my last slides. So keep in mind when you have a student, whether it's for Tourette or anything else with exceptionalities, that there's a lot more going on under the surface than just the diagnoses. So the big question, how can teachers ensure that a student with this syndrome reaches their full potential? So this is where I get to tell you about my own personal teaching philosophy.